Hello, everybody. Welcome back to AP World History, Unit 8/9 with Mr. Ancharsky. This is Chapter 3. And we're going to continue our discussion of the quote-unquote third world, or rather, more accurately, the non-aligned world. We're going to look at the process of decolonization. First, we're going to look at India. Then we're going to look at Africa and other parts of Asia on our next presentation, Chapter 4. But today we're going to focus on India, hence the name of this presentation, Indian Independence. Your bell work is on the screen. Kind of consider things from Unit 5, meaning the American Revolution, the Latin American revolutions, the Haitian Revolution. So how have countries achieved their independence in the past? That's kind of the theme of what you should be able to recognize, at least for both my test, but also for the AP exam. So the comparison with previous forms of independence movements. So today we are looking at Indian independence. We are going to look how British India will transition into the creation of new states across the Indian subcontinent. So the lesson objective today is to compare the processes by which various peoples pursued independence after 1900. You should be able to describe what is going on in the Indian subcontinent, meaning the modern day countries of India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan. Today, we're going to, as I said, look at the process by which India will transition from a colonial possession towards an independent country. We're going to look at this early 20th century period. But before we do that, we're going to look at what India looks like under British rule. And this is kind of more of a summary of different tensions that exist in colonial India that are contributing to Indian independence. So let's first look at some economic tensions. And basically what to take away from this is that the British have absolute political economic hegemony over the economy of India. Remember that the British, they are largely going to encourage infrastructure building in India, meaning dams and railroads and to a degree factories. And yet, who owns these infrastructure projects? Who owns the railroads? Who owns the electric companies? Well, it's largely British investors. So even though there will be a little industry in India, largely it is owned by foreigners or by local Indians who are kind of just getting in good with the British, so to say. We are going to see, as a result of this limited industry, a degree of a middle class forming in India. And the middle class is going to kind of be divided on the question of, do we become independent? Do we support the British? But we'll take a look at how that might shift later on. So we have somewhat of a economy dominated by the British, at least in terms of infrastructure. And largely the British are keeping India largely as a exporting colony, primarily through cash crops like opium and rice and cotton, spices as well. Although British people tend not to use spice in their food, I don't know why they have India. Anyway, India produces these raw materials. Especially important is cotton and also products like iron as well. And we'll see how that's important during the world wars later on. But the British government still has a huge say in what goes on in Indian economics. There is going to be a monopoly on salt that the British have. The British have very high taxes for anyone that seeks to buy salt from, the salt mines across India. So there is going to be a salt monopoly by the government that's very unpopular by the peasant class, especially in India. So this salt monopoly is a major source of tension between the British and the Indian population. There's essentially a tax on salt that's very high and not something that most peasants can pay for. But as a result of kind of how the British are using India as a tool for economic growth, we are going to see changes that are contributing to even more economic tensions as well. But let's look at that process a little bit. Well, as a result of kind of overworking the land, so to say, as a result of over cultivation of rice, of other cash crops like cotton and rice, we are going to see periods of drought. We are going to see deforestation across India. we are going to see instances of famine as well. And really, the British colonial government not doing much to solve these problems. The viceroy seems out of touch with everyday individuals in India. But there is going to be an overall population growth as a result of the British building infrastructure, as the result of British improving agricultural production. And this is going to lead to a great increase of India's population. By 1947, we have at least 3 million Indians on the Indian subcontinent, at least a huge amount at that time, which is contributing to what we call population stress. Is there going to be enough resources for equal distribution? Will we have kind of a equitable distribution of natural resources among the different groups of people in India? So increased population is leading to concerns about sustainability. It's leading to concerns about overcrowding in cities. And we'll look at these tensions in the cities in just a second. But basically, we have this economic tension emerging. And largely it's being directed against the government of India, largely operated by, you guessed it, the British. So these economic tensions fueling anti-British sentiment, especially over the British inability to manage their colonial society in India. And speaking of Indian society, let's take a look at kind of some tensions that exist there. Well, we have economic tensions. We have this tension that's being played out in the countryside and the cities themselves. In the countryside, we have extremely high rents. We have high taxes. Landlords are either British or they are wealthy Indians that are collaborating with the British. So we have very high economic poverty in the countryside in India. And that's contributing again to anti-British sentiment because there is this perception that the British are encouraging this economic inequality. In urban centers, we are seeing poverty mostly as a result of this distinction, this class difference between the British, mostly factory owners, and Indian workers in these cities. We're seeing labor unions to try and advocate for more economic equality. But we have this overall hegemony, economically speaking, by the British, leading to mass amounts of poverty in Indian cities. So there's an economic tension that's slowly transitioning to more of a hostility to British rule in India. But on top of that, we have tensions between ethnicities and religions in India. And that is primarily going to be the result of how the British organized colonial India. So let's just review real quick. Remember, way back in Unit 3, the Mughal Empire took over India. The Mughals, largely Muslims. And the Mughals existed and were around really until the British got there. And when the British got to India, and when they established a presence through the East India Company, they're going to look at these racial and ethnic and religious hierarchies that were established with the Muslims largely in charge, a majority of Indians being Hindus. And they're going to say, this looks like how it's supposed to be. We should encourage Indians to be ruled over by Muslims in some parts of India. So we are going to have kind of the British encouraging a class distinction, you could say, between Indians of Hindu persuasion and Muslims as well in India. So we have this hierarchy that is causing resentment of Muslims by Hindus. We're also seeing how the British are encouraging caste distinctions in the Hindu community. Remember, we have that caste system in Hinduism. And the British are really encouraging upper caste people at the expense of lower caste people. Upper caste people have more opportunities economically, and politically and socially. But kind of in this atmosphere, Muslims are largely a minority. And that's potentially threatening because what if India got its independence? What if there suddenly was a republic in India? And that means we have what we call tyranny of the majority, that the Hindus could potentially persecute Muslims. So there is this fear by the Muslim minority of what could happen if India is independent. So largely Muslims are saying, we need the British to stay here. to keep things in order to prevent this anti-Muslim violence that could occur. And there are instances of it occurring during colonial India. And we're going to look at how that will intensify during this debate over independence. And we see here on this map, this is the Indian subcontinent. And other than Afghanistan up here, much of this was a part of the British Raj, of the British dominance in India. This area over here is largely going to be populated by Muslims, the green areas. And this is the modern day country of Pakistan. But we have these religious distinctions even today. Mostly during the British rule, Muslims lived in Pakistan. They also lived in this region known as Bangladesh right here. And we're going to actually come back to Bengal in just a second, but this is where it is roughly on the map. So this is just a breakdown of the different religions in India. Of course, the two main ones being Muslims and the yellow part, Hindus. Well, what does the political system look like in India? Well, it goes back to the idea of the British having absolute power in India. The British allow a degree of self-government. They have something known as the Indian Civil Service. It's essentially made up of middle-class Hindus. It is largely made up of prominent locals in India. And they have a lot of say in local politics, but the overall colonial administration is governed by a dude called the Viceroy. The Viceroy is the British representative of the British government in India. He supervises, and all of them are he supervises colonial government in India. And largely, even though while there is some local politics, guess who's in charge of everything? At the end of the day, it's the British. So there is going to be calls for what we call self-government in India. And self-government isn't necessarily independence. Independence and self-government are actually different things. Independence, you have no connection whatsoever with, in this case, the British. But right now, in the early 20th century, in the late 19th century, a lot of people in India, at least among prominent Indians, they're okay with self-government. They want more local say in colonial government. They also want the viceroy to go away. They want an Indian civil service made up of, well, Indians. They don't want to have any kind of British control over local politics, but they're fine still being a part of the empire, of recognizing at this point King George, of being the head of state. So Indians at this point, they want to remain in the Commonwealth. However, there is kind of a basis for this self-government movement, largely inspired by the ideas of the Enlightenment. It's kind of a continuity, you could say, and that's something you could put on your cover sheet, a continuity between the American and French revolutions and the Haitian Revolution, the influence of the Enlightenment, that idea of natural rights, of middle-class government, basically. But also the ideas of nationalism are being encouraged by this middle class. There is this call for a distinct Indian national identity. And one of these political parties that emerges, and the most prominent on the Hindu side of things, is going to be the Indian National Congress, the INC. The INC is largely made up of middle class, kind of upper caste Hindus as well. And largely at this point, in the late 19th century, they're advocating for self-government. They don't want the British to leave in terms of their military, but self-rule and home rule is something that these people in the INC want at this point. Well, we're going to see how World War I will transition this demand for self-government. This will transition towards calls for complete and total independence. So for now, late 19th century until World War I, we are going to see among the INC calling for self-government rather than total independence. Another political party that's going to emerge is the All India Muslim League, or simply put, the Muslim League. They mean the same thing. The Muslim League is primarily active in Pakistan today, well, its descendants more accurately, but the Muslim League is going to have its origins in this debate about self-rule and independence, this kind of controversy between these two ideas. The Muslim League is largely going to form out of the idea of trying to protect the interests of India's Muslim minority against the majority of Hindus. And it all goes back to kind of British policy, actually. In Bengal, and just to look at it one more time, this is the region of Bengal right here where my mouse is, this green area right here. And in 1905, there's going to be a plan by the British government to divide up Bengal between a Muslim majority area and a Hindu majority area. And the partition plan is not viewed well by Muslims, especially this prospect of having a Hindu majority area where a Muslim minority could be persecuted. So to kind of advocate for the interests of Indian Muslims, we see the rise of the Muslim League. And even though they are successful getting rid of this partition plan, there still are concerns about this Hindu majority potentially persecuting the minority. So really, the Muslim League at this point is kind of in support of the British. They view the British as a kind of necessary barrier to a Hindu-dominated India. So the Muslim League by this point is kind of skeptical about independence. They are not necessarily pro-British, but they see them as a kind of necessary evil to prevent a Hindu majority government from forming. So we have kind of dual political systems, political parties forming that are advocating for different things concerning colonial government. But events in World War I are going to change this call for just self-government towards complete and total independence, kick the British out of India. And really the event that triggers this is WW1, World War I. Remember, during World War I, European countries of all flavors and sizes that had colonies in Africa or Asia, they utilized that concept of total war, that everyone in an empire was involved in the process of waging war. So the British are no exception to this. They are going to heavily utilize India during the war. They are going to draw from the subjects of India, especially colonial troops. They're going to draw from textiles and other raw materials that are produced in India. So the British are heavily utilizing India for the war effort. And in order to ensure, I'm making weird hand gestures, in order to ensure that the Indians participate in all of this, there are going to be promises by the British government to grant more self-government after World War I is over. If you cooperate now, we will let you do what you want, more or less. We'll let you become Canada, essentially. Remember, Canada is a part of this Commonwealth, and technically, they're a part of the British Empire, but they have absolute self-rule. There's no royal governor in Canada. So there is this promise of of self-government after the war. And to the British credit, there is going to be some promises kept. We have the Montagu-Chelmsford reforms in 1919 at the end of World War I. Basically, local Indians can serve on any political position in local government in India. We can have elections in cities. We can have elections in rural communities, in villages and towns across India. And Indians can fill those political positions. However, despite granting this self-government to India's more prominent members, we are going to see massive government repression in things like the Rowlatt Act. The Rowlatt Act is going to encourage British censorship of anything produced in India. It's going to encourage it's going to largely allow for disregarding civil rights in India. It's going to outlaw kind of forms of anti-British protest in India. And it's really rolling back civil liberties in India. So this is going to lead to a mass movement of protest against this repression, against this censorship. So these protests largely non-violent, but they're going to be met with British heavy resistance. We're going to see things like the uh, Amritsar massacre in 1919, a group of peaceful Indian protesters. They're going to be shot down by the British. It's absolutely disturbing to a lot of people in India who are saying, bro, we just wanted self-government. But now we're realizing you guys are going to shoot us down whenever you feel like it, after we had some peaceful protests. So we're seeing the transition towards independence by members of, say, the INC, by members who include figures like, where is he? Oh, here he is. Figures like Mahatma or Mohandas Gandhi. It's Gandhi right there. So you should be able to identify some tensions in colonial India and then kind of think what might be some motivations for independence? What are some short-term factors? What are some long-term factors? So let's look at this process of a move towards Indian independence. We're going to first look at this figure right here, Mohandas or Mahatma Gandhi. Gandhi is going to be the primary leader for independence throughout the 1920s and up until its independence in the 1940s. Stop texting me. So we are going to see a Indian independence movement form around Gandhi. And Gandhi is very notable because of his insistence on this notion of non-violent resistance. He is in favor of civil disobedience. And we'll look at some examples of how Gandhi is encouraging resistance through non-violent means. But what's so successful about Gandhi is that he is going to successfully expand the notion of independence to not just be the Hindu middle class, but he's making appeals to all sorts of people in India, to the Indian working class, to peasant populations, to lower caste people. And he's also going to make appeals to Muslims. They're largely not going to work, as we'll see, but he is trying to expand beyond just the Indian middle class. And really, that's kind of a big thing because Gandhi himself, he's a middle class guy. He's a lawyer. He actually travels to South Africa to defend the rights of Indians in colonial South Africa. So in 1909, he's going to publish a book. It's called Hind Swaraj. And it's going to be a book that advocates for Indian home rule, Indian self-government. But it's going to be largely censored by the British government in India. So this is kind of encouraging Gandhi to be a bit more radical and demand immediate independence. And then, of course, we have events like the Amritsar massacre. This is going to lead to Gandhi saying, we need the British out of India, if but to save our people from being massacred by the British. So Gandhi is going to pioneer kind of some strategies to incorporate a wider variety of people to support independence, but also kind of ways to gain international legitimacy and recognition for this independence movement. For one thing, Gandhi is going to try and build what we call a mass movement. So incorporating elements not just of the middle class, but of other classes as well, of the working class, of the peasant class, of people in the lower castes in Hindu society. So Gandhi's really going to be responsible for transitioning the INC, the Indian National Congress, from being just a middle class party to one that is more inclusive of different classes across Indian society. Gandhi is also opposed to the legal imposition of the caste system. He's in favor of promoting lower caste people into Indian society, into Indian politics. And Gandhi is even going to reach out to Muslims. He is going to say, this is a movement for all of us. We need the British out. We can work out our differences after independence. However, the thing of it is, people are skeptical of the Muslim population in India. Hindus are largely skeptical of Muslims because of the kind of favoring that the British had of the Muslim groups in India, the appearance of that anyway. And there's also going to be kind of this overall fear, something that I talked about earlier, that the British are there to protect Muslims from Hindus. So Hindu nationalists, extremists who aren't in favor of Gandhi, they're kind of alienating for Muslims. And Gandhi isn't kind of able to bring in these Muslims towards his independence movement, unfortunately. But Gandhi is trying to make a sense of Indian nationalism. He's going to stress kind of that India should be a place for Indians. It should not have elements of Western culture. It's for this reason Gandhi's actually going to ditch the suit and tie that we saw in the previous slide. He's going to adapt more traditional clothing in Indian society. And this is going to really have kind of two kind of factors towards it all. Gandhi is stressing cultural independence by having more traditional clothing, but he's also stressing economic independence. He's not buying from British manufacturers. He's buying homemade. He's buying stuff produced in India by Indians, not with British machines. And kind of what Gandhi is most known for is going to be his program of nonviolent resistance. He is going to initiate mass protests, mass marches of everyday people against the British rule. Basically, his motto is he wants to make India ungovernable, that the British have no choice but to just leave because no one's listening to them. And part of that is going to be through nonviolent resistance. He is going to do things like the Salt March. This is going to essentially be Gandhi protesting the salt tax, the salt monopoly, going to the ocean, making his own salt. But Gandhi is also well known for his hunger strikes, for his instances of public fasting. And he's doing this with nonviolent means. So if the British were to, arrest him or crack down on these nonviolent protesters, countries around the world are going to be like, whoa, you can't do that. That's a little dictatorial of you, Great Britain. So we have this overall promotion of civil disobedience causing an international sensation that is in support of Indian independence. And speaking of an international sensation, Gandhi is going to be super important when we talk about decolonization in Africa, because a lot of his programs of nonviolent resistance are going to be adopted by some African independence movements. He's also important in the US civil rights movement. Gandhi and his ideas of nonviolent resistance, they're going to be incorporated by everyone's favorite civil rights leader, Martin Luther King Jr. in the United States. And you'll learn about him more in APUSH, of course. But kind of as an effect of Gandhi's nonviolent resistance, the British are going to try to keep the peace as much as possible. They're going to give in to some demands by this independence movement. By the 1920s, the British are handing over the quote-unquote national areas. These include things like major industries and infrastructure. They include public institutions like education and the police force. And this is going to have the effect of encouraging economic independence. We have an independent economy in India that's not really dependent on the British because the British handed over the keys to the factories. This is going to have the effect of increasing the middle class in India even more. These people largely in favor of independence based on Enlightenment and nationalist ideas. And really, what's going to be the event that kind of is an opportunity for more demands by the Indian independence movement? Well, it's going to be Gandhi's Quit India movement. During World War II, this is a time when Great Britain has a lot to deal with on their plate. So Gandhi's going to make his policy of making India ungovernable. And this is going to be a time when we see mass accounts of civil disobedience. There's going to be mass protest movements across India. There's hunger strikes. There's public marches. There's strikes in factories. And all of this is making the British say, okay, it's not worth it. It's not worth it to be here. However, the Quit India movement is not going to be supported by the Muslim League. The Muslim League is skeptical again of this Hindu majority taking power if the British would leave. But realizing that this is an actuality, that this could happen, we're starting to see the Muslim League say, we need a new country just for Muslims. We need to have a separate state away from the Hindus. And this is something we'll discuss more later on. This is going to kind of alienate Muslims from Hindus to a degree. Hindus are saying, hey, you guys aren't supporting this independence movement. And Muslims are saying, well, we have legitimate reasons not to. So we're going to see a lot of religious violence in India during this time. Muslims will be attacked by Hindus in more Hindu populated areas. We are seeing violence against Sikh people. We're seeing violence against Jains. We're seeing violence against anyone not in line with this program of independence. However, among Hindus, we are going to see electoral victories in these self-governing communities, in these cities, in these countrysides. And we are going to see the INC gain an electoral victory. And essentially, after that happens, the British realize there's no hope for us here. We're going to leave. Here you go. You have independence. 1947, India gets its independence. Hooray. So you should know who Gandhi is, this guy. And you should also kind of be able to describe how Indian independence is achieved. However, independence is not going to alleviate any of these tensions, or at least some of them. And we're going to look at that right now, especially with the partition of India. And remember, colonial India looks like this image on the left right here. India is a huge subcontinent. It's not exactly a continent, but it's pretty big. So we have a huge colony that the British have. But as we're going to see in a second, India is going to be partitioned or divided into different sections. We have Pakistan in the west, and we also are going to see a Muslim majority in what will be called East Pakistan or modern-day Bangladesh. So this is what's going to happen as a result of partition. Let's look at it a bit more right now. Well, when the British finally hand over power to the INC, there's going to be internal debates within India about how do we reorganize our country following independence. Well, there's going to be first that immediate issue of how do we deal with these religious tensions. So there's going to be a few sit-downs between the different leaders of the Indian groups of people, between the INC, mostly Hindus, and the Muslim League, mostly, well, Muslims. And there's going to be a series of negotiations between these two guys right here. On the INC side, we have Gandhi's successor, a guy by the name of Jawaharlal Nehru. Nehru is going to be the first prime minister of India, but he has this intention of keeping India together. He's wanting to secularize India, to make it so it's not a majority Hindu country, it's not a minority Muslim country. There's no state religion. So really, Nehru has this appeal, and he wants to talk to Muslims. He wants to talk to the Muslim League. The Muslim League is led by this guy right here, a guy by the name of Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Jinnah is very much going to say, okay, we will talk, but we want to make it clear that Muslims deserve protections in India. So the Muslim League is going to sit down with the INC, and unfortunately, because of this overall atmosphere of suspicion, because of this increased Hindu violence against Muslims, Jinnah is going to say, well, we can't live together. For the sake of Muslims on the Indian subcontinent, we can't live together. We are going to make our own country. And that is going to be what will lead to the creation of Pakistan. Pakistan, majority Muslim country. India, majority Hindu country. Jinnah, he is going to be the first independent leader of Pakistan, as we'll see. So we're seeing this partition of India into two different countries, into India and to Pakistan. And at this point, India kind of looks like this. We have West Pakistan and East Pakistan, both places governed by the same government, majority Muslims. It goes back to that earlier chart that I showed you of the demographics of religion in the Indian subcontinent. However, what is the impact of the partition? Because it's going to have a very, very big impact on Indian society. Even to this day, there is still going to be a lot of mistrust and tensions between Muslims and Hindus. But let's take a look at what is going on and in this kind of post-partition world. Well, we're going to see a mass migration of different groups of people. Hindus in Pakistan, they're going to flee to India. Muslims in India, they're going to flee to Pakistan. So as a result of all of this, we're seeing a vast amount of movement of religious minorities. We are going to see over 12 million people migrating between both sides in the Indian subcontinent. Some are going to go to West Pakistan. Some Muslims are going to West Pakistan. Some Muslims are going to East Pakistan. And as this transition is happening, we're going to see lots of intercommunal violence, intercommunal conflict. And intercommunal, this means interreligious. So conflicts between Muslims and Hindus, between Hindus and Sikhs, between Hindus and Jains, different ethnicities and religions across India, they are going to come into conflict with each other. We see massive violence, especially along the border between West Pakistan and India. And this is going to cause problems even within India, especially with this rise of kind of right-wing Hindu extremism. In 1948, a Hindu extremist who's mad at Gandhi for quote unquote letting Pakistan go, he's going to assassinate Gandhi. Gandhi, the leader of independence, is going to fall victim to this intercommunal violence. And this intercommunal violence is contributing to geopolitical tensions as well. We are going to see tensions over territory between Pakistan and India, and China even gets into this mix, especially over this region up here known as Kashmir. This is a major region of northern Pakistan and northern India, and it's not really clear who owns it. So there's going to be even continued violence and fear of violence to this day in the Indian subcontinent. There's also going to be territorial disputes over East Pakistan down here. A group of people known as the Bengalis, a ethnic group that lives in this region, they're going to say, we don't want to be ruled over by West Pakistanis. So they're going to form their own country, which is going to become Bangladesh as a result of the Bangladeshi or Bangladesh Liberation War. So by 1972, we have Bangladesh as an independent country. Just to kind of show the impact of this violence that will be done in partition India, we're going to see mass atrocities being committed against Muslims in India, against Hindus in Pakistan. And this is right here is an image that shows that violence. We are seeing mass migration of people. I said before, 12 million individuals moving from either India to Pakistan or Pakistan to India, etc. And Gandhi is going to be given a huge state funeral. There's millions who turn up to witness the death of a martyr for Indian independence who really tried to solve this problem of intercommunal violence. Stop texting me. I'm talking about something sad. So you should be able to compare and contrast India to other independence movements we've talked about so far. So how is India similar or different to, say, Latin American independence? How is it similar to the United States' independence? How is it similar to Haitian independence? The rest of the slides I have, the final two, they aren't going to be on your test for my class, but they are in pieces of information that might be important for the AP exam, especially that idea of contextualization. What is happening after a essay prompt? So let's look at what is going on in India. Well, let's look at India first, then we'll look at Pakistan. India is going to largely become a secularized nation. There is a Hindu majority, but we have a secular government, one that respects the political freedoms, religious freedoms of different minorities across India. We're also going to see a program of modernization, especially in the Indian economy. We're going to see rapid development of India's infrastructure. We're going to see rapid development of India's industry. And really, we're going to see India kind of become a major source of economic production in the world. We'll discuss this a bit more with our final chapter, but we're seeing how kind of industrial nations are outsourcing their labor to India, kind of as India is developing its industry. it has very cheap labor. So that's why we are going to see Western countries, especially, promote industrialization in India. It's a source of cheap labor that drives production costs low. We're also going to see a modernization of India's agricultural system. We're going to see kind of the impact of the Green Revolution. Remember, this was the movement that is inspiring improved agricultural production across the world. But it's going to have an impact in India as well. We're going to have more sustainable food practices, leading to an increased population. To this day, India has a population over the billions, in over 1 billion. But India politically is kind of going to fall in between the big superpowers during the Cold War. It is a part of the non-aligned movement. It's not going to side with the Soviets. It's not going to side with the Americans. And kind of an example of how flexible India is during this time is that while India is generally capitalistic, there are going to be instances of kind of Marxist development in India. We have the so-called Kerala method, or the Kerala model, I should say. So there's a state in India, in modern day India, kind of like how the United States has states. Well, there's a state in India called Kerala. It's in this south right here. And Kerala is going to see the election of left-leaning governments, especially of Marxist governments, of a communist government. And really, there is going to be very generous social welfare programs. We are going to see not high incomes, but we are going to see very high standards of living as a result of these government welfare programs. This is going to put the Kerala on par with Western European countries. It surpasses, in some cases, Western European countries. It surpasses, some cases, the United States. There's high literacy rates. There's high amount of economic security across Kerala. So it really kind of shows how India is trying to form its own economic identity during this time, especially in its experimentation in some states with communism, with socialism, more accurately. We're also going to see the rise of more inclusive gender politics in India with the ascent of this lady right here, Indira Gandhi. No relation, funnily enough, to Mahatma Gandhi. She's actually the daughter of Jawaharlal Nehru, and her husband had the last name of Gandhi, again, not related to Mohandas, but he's going to actually change his name towards the more traditional spelling of Gandhi. And really, that's a huge association between Gandhi and Gandhi, you know, the independence leader. And now you have the same last name, you're the super popular person. So actually, there's going to be a bit of a dynasty in India, kind of like how there's the Bush dynasty in the United States. We have Gandhi and Nehru. They have a political legacy that lasts even to this day. There are accusations of corruption because of this. But Indira is going to largely lead India towards this path of industrialization, towards more free market liberalization, leading to a more inclusive place in the world economy. However, we are still seeing problems of Indian ethnic conflict, Indian religious conflicts, especially between Muslims and Hindus. So we are seeing remaining ethnic and nationalist tensions. We see the rise of a right-wing extremist form of Hindu nationalism called Hindutva. And largely this movement of Hindu nationalism still has an impact today, still leading to a lot of anti-Muslim bigotry in India. Actually, this will spill over into kind of hostility towards Indira Gandhi way back in the 1980s, or 1970s rather. Indira Gandhi, she is viewed as kind of too sympathetic towards non-Muslims. And at the same time, non-Muslims are saying, you seem a little too sympathetic to Hindus. So Indira is actually going to be killed by her Sikh bodyguards in the 1970s. It's very tragic that we still have these religious tensions in India. Let's turn our attention to Pakistan. Pakistan is largely going to develop a very kind of identity based on Islam, especially in reaction to the Hindu nationalism of India. So we're going to see this rise of kind of pro-Islamic ideas in India. This is the flag of Pakistan, rather. This is the flag of Pakistan right here. It very much shows the Muslim identity of Pakistan. So as such, it's going to be a very strong Muslim feeling in Pakistan. It's largely hostile to communism. Guess who that's good for? The United States. Pakistan is going to develop a nuclear weapons program during this time. India, in response, will also develop a nuclear weapons program. So there's kind of, even to this day, a bit of a Cold War between Pakistan and India. There's tensions over Kashmir. Who controls this piece of territory? Is it India? Is it Pakistan? And to make things even more complicated, is it China? Pakistan is going to largely see sympathy for fundamentalist movements, Islamic fundamentalist movements. This is something that is contributing to the rise of the Taliban. In addition to US support, you also have Pakistani support for the rise of the Taliban in Afghanistan. So that kind of brings us up to speed on Pakistan and India to a degree to this day. So I have a John Green video. Watch that at your leisure or for your information, or if your elucidation. So thank you for watching. Have a great rest of the day. Yeah. Yep. Oh yeah, there's a movie about Gandhi starring Ben Kingsley, and they darkened his face. To be fair, Kingsley is half Gujarati, so he is a descendant from people from the Indian subcontinent. Anyway, that's a film criticism for a different day. Have a great rest of your day.